everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Arch Study of You. I am your host, Cameron Gilmore. I hope you guys buckle up, sit down, and get ready to be inspired. As you noticed on the theme or the title of this interview is called 7 Years for a Crime I Didn't Commit. Now, listen, I have met Sean through a good friend of mine. I grabbed his book, which you will see throughout the course of this conversation, Prison of Your Own. And I read it. It took me 2 days to read this book. Fantastic book, phenomenal book. We've got so much to unpack, so much to uncover. But first off, let me give you a little bit of a history about Sean so you guys know the caliber of the person we're talking to. Went to prison for 7 years for a crime he didn't commit, a childhood that is out of the movies. We'll talk a lot about that. Author of Prison of Your Own, life coach. He's a speaker. He's getting ready to be featured on an event next month. I cannot express the gratitude and the humility we have for having Sean on. Sean, thank you so much for being here. If you could take 5 to 7 minutes to kind of introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background, but more importantly, tell us about your why.
Oh, I love that, man. Well, first of all, Cameron, thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate it. Love your energy and just everything that you're about, as we spoke previously. So, I grew up in a beautiful beach community in Southern California, Santa Barbara. If anyone's been there, it's a highly sought out tourist destination. People come from all over the world to visit here because it's so pristine, it's so beautiful. And I had the ability to call this home. Like, I was very gifted for that. And so growing up as a kid, I was also afforded, quite a bit of family members in the area. I had aunts and uncles. My dad has a large extended family. So I had cousins to play with that lived around the corner. We had friends from the neighborhood that were always coming over. Growing up, it was like something out of the movies. It was like The Sandlot. We'd go off and play baseball at the park all day, or we'd be out riding on our bikes. And this was when, it felt safe to do so, especially in our community. Is a safe place to grow up. And then the ocean and the beach was only 5 minutes away. So every day we were either down at the beach playing, we were in the neighborhoods playing, riding bikes. And it seemed amazing to me. Growing up as a kid, I loved sports. I just dreamt every day of being a professional athlete. And I would literally come home from school and go in the backyard and throw the baseball on the roof and then chase it and dive to catch it. Like I was envisioning being in the big game, making the game winning catch. And then we had this, it was kind of like a cement wall in the backyard. It was only 2 feet high, but I'd throw the baseball at it and then field ground balls to myself. And I was just practicing every day. I literally obsessed over being a professional athlete. And as I got a little older, that passion also shifted into surfing. And I got into surfing for some time, and I wanted to be a professional surfer. But the theme for me as a child, was like to dream. Like, I dreamt so big, and I believed that I could pursue that vision. There was nothing holding me back. I felt fully capable to realize those dreams and to become the person that I envisioned becoming every day of my life. But when I got to be about 10 or 11 and 12, things at home started getting my attention. I started realizing that my parents were different than other kids' parents. There was incidents of them fighting and a lot of conflict at home that started to make me feel scared and nervous about my life and unsure about my life and unsure about myself. What I once had was a safe, secure home life that supported me in who I wanted to become. And now that felt that it was in jeopardy. Thank God that I had my Uncle Mike who lived with us. He was like my guardian angel growing up, man. He was my dad's oldest brother. He didn't have a family of his own. He had always taken care of his younger siblings. My dad's one of 9 siblings, and my Uncle Mike was the oldest. And because his dad wasn't the best father as well, he took on that role, and a theme that runs really deep in my family is alcoholism. And that's something we can talk about later on. But so it had been passed down, generation to generation. And now my dad was afflicted by drug and alcohol addiction. My mother was as well. And my Uncle Mike really took care of us kids growing up. But I was still saddened seeing my parents in that state. I still knew at a young age that something was wrong. I knew they weren't like my friends' parents or the other kids' parents that I saw at school. And so, this was always on my mind. And this was something that tormented me to an extent. I saw my mother overdose 2 times before the age of 12, dead on the floor. The ambulance coming to our house and taking her out on the stretcher with the paramedics. And that scarred me, man. I remember driving home from school or practice on some days, seeing an ambulance with their lights on going in the direction of our home, being overcome with fear and paralyzed, thinking that they were going to my house, you know. And
Yeah.
I reflect on that as an adult now and thinking about how horrible that is for a child to be thinking those thoughts and feeling that type of emotion at such a young age. Um, you know, and it was interesting because on the one hand, we had all this negativity going on, but on the other hand, we had immense love and like stewardship from my Uncle Mike and my extended family, and my parents were loving people too. So it was this like dichotomy of drug addiction, of violence, of like arguments, and but then there was this love and this bond and this loyalty that we all shared, which made it almost tougher on us because I always just wanted my parents to get well and to be sober and to be the people we needed, to be
Right.
the mom and dad that I desperately needed. So that was my childhood. It was a mixture of dreams and glory and also a darker side. And then going into high school, my freshman year, everything came unraveled. My dad was altered heavily on substance and alcohol, and he got in an argument and he had a pistol that he was brandishing at the household, and the cops got called. And now my dad was on the front yard or down the street, and he was in a standoff with the police. And I thought he was going to be killed right in front of me. I really did. It was terrifying. And he ended up surrendering, but he got arrested and sent to prison. And then shortly after, my mother literally left us. She abandoned us. Her drug addiction got the best of her. And she really became somebody that I didn't recognize anymore. She did permanent damage to herself through her drug and alcohol addiction. And so now here I am at 14, my first semester in high school as a freshman. And I don't even know who I am as a young man yet. I'm still trying to form that identity.
Right.
And now I lost both my parents. And that just absolutely devastated me. It was the worst pain I had ever felt in my life. I had no idea how to cope or deal with it. And I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to accept it. So I stopped hanging out with a lot of the kids that knew me from childhood. I stopped going to family functionings and events. I didn't want to see anybody. I started smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol and hanging out with kids that were doing that. And I realized when I was high or altered, I didn't have to remember the past. I didn't have to think about it. I could just be numb. And I wanted to be numb. I really did. And so what happened is through high school from 14 to 18, I stayed numb and checked out. I never played any sports. I never tried in any capacity, whether it was in my academics or athletics. And I was just drifting, going through the motions of life. And so at the age of 18, I get out of school and I actually graduated. They basically gave me a diploma and said, get out of here, you know, you're lucky. Yeah. Like, here's your diploma. I didn't do anything right. to earn it. I didn't do anything to earn it. And then now I was left thinking, well, what am I going to do with my life? I have no direction, no goals, no ambitions. I'm still just a wounded child internally. And so my uncle Mark, a different brother, had a tree service, a company that cut trees, trim trees here in Santa Barbara. And he had a really prominent company. He was doing well. And so he said, hey, come work with me. You know, I want you to be here. I want you to work with me. And I started doing that out of high school. And that was the first time that I actually took pride in something I was doing since I was, 10 or 11 years old playing sports. Yeah. And it helped me tremendously to forge work ethic. It helped me to build a sense of confidence and competence in myself that I lacked. But I was still abusing drugs and alcohol. So I was still, holding myself back. And that's what I was doing from 18 until I was 23, when I ended up going to a party where there was a fight between two groups of people. And because of me being drunk and altered and being a knucklehead and wanting to get involved in seeing what's going on, I'm right there in the mix of the fight as these two groups of people are arguing. And when the fight does break out, I ended up getting pulled into the melee. I get tackled from the side, and now I'm defending myself, wrestling around with this guy. And I think him and his friends are jumping me, and I'm tackled to the ground, and I'm trying to get this person off of me. I expect to get kicked and punched in the head. Nothing happened, which was odd. And now I have this big, massive person on top of me, and I finally roll him over, and I'm expecting this guy's going to start punching me and attacking me, and nothing happened. But I threw 2 punches as I was getting up to defend myself. And when that happened, I didn't even hit him, man. I was all reactive, but he didn't get up. He stayed face down in the grass. And I thought that was really strange. Meanwhile, this is taking place in split second scenario, right? Everything's just
Right,
happening
right.
rapid fire, and people are yelling, screaming, and we end up leaving the party. We run away basically. But before that had happened, I get to the street where my friend was yelling my name, and I walk towards him, and he looks at me, and this like look of dread consumes him. He goes, "Sean, you're covered in blood, man. What just happened?" And I mean, this was probably a 15-second fight where all this took place.
Hmm.
And I looked down at my shirt. I had a shirt kind of like this, the sleeves, the arms, I mean, the chest, it was just drenched in blood, and I had blood all over my face. And I couldn't make sense of what happened. And we were just in shock. We were scared. We ran. And as we're going up the street, cars are coming, you hear sirens. And we took a little turn into this laundromat that was adjacent to the street, right as the cop cars raced by. It was something out of a Hollywood movie, almost like we were in this perfect getaway. And
Yeah.
we didn't even plan it. It was just happening. And we go to the laundromat, and he's like, "Hey, you can't wear that shirt, man. You got to take it off." And I take the shirt off, and he throws me some random shirt he found from the dryer. And I put it on. And before we went outside to see the fight, we had actually called a cab because we were going to go home. We were like
Right.
5 minutes from leaving. So there was a cab waiting for us up the street, and we walk to the cab, and we get in and we leave, and we make it back to his place. But the next day I was arrested. The cops came to his residence. They tracked me through my cell phone. They brought the SWAT team, the K9 unit, the forensic unit. There was like 20 police cars on the street. And they put an AR-15 to the back of my head and cuffed me, at gunpoint, and charged me with an attempted murder. And that's when my whole life changed. I was booked into the county jail at 3 years old, charged for an attempted murder that I didn't do.
Oh, yo, hold on. Wait, okay. I told you his life was a movie. Like, you guys didn't think you thought I was joking, but I'm not. Like, the stuff that you went through in a short period of time is unbelievable. Unbelievable. I need to go back. I want to go back to something, because you gave us such a great insight to the pre-jail, pre-prison, and we'll get, trust me, there's a lot more to get into this. But I want to ask you this question because I hear this a lot from people that I interact with, they have trouble at home, or their, parents in and out of their life, or even if they have both parents at home, right? And it's just, there's just not this good bond. So on page 6 in your book, you said something very powerful. It says, "My life revolved around sports and family. I love baseball, basketball, and football. That was my world." Obviously, surfing was your world too. Was that world that you were building? Did you love that world because that was something that you could control? Because you couldn't control all the things that, like you said, what was going on at the house, between your parents and the fighting and in and out. Did you love playing sports because you actually really loved the sport? Or was it because that was a space that you could control and nobody else could control that for us? Help us understand just that space a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And to be honest with you, I never have thought of it that way. My initial reaction is, I love competition and I love to push myself. I always wanted to be the best in anything that I was doing. Growing up, being competitive with older cousins, I was the oldest in my family, so I always was the best in sports and games and stuff like that. But I had older cousins and kids in the neighborhood, so I was very competitive. So at a young age, I think that's what drove me. But when I think about surfing, that was different for me, because surfing allowed me to kind of escape. And as I was getting older, I was 11, 12, 13, when stuff at home was really starting to get bad, I could go out and surf and be in the water like a kid, just splashing around the ocean without a care in the world. And in that moment, all my problems dissolved, they dissipated. All I thought about was the moment I was in. And it didn't matter what was happening at home. I could be happy when I was surfing. So maybe unconsciously, that's what was happening. Maybe that I felt it was my element, or I had some control over that situation more so than at home. But that was never a conscious thought for me. I really was just doing what I loved and what I felt like I was meant to be doing.
Oh, that's what's so powerful is the brain, right? The brain just helps you in a young age. And, as young as you were, I mean, obviously, as you can look back and through all the work that you're doing, you could probably go back and start to pinpoint these special moments and go, yeah, that was a time that was my space. It was just you on the waves. I mean, when I was reading that part, when I was listening to that and reading a lot of the parts in the book, I remember just thinking, man, that show Point Break, right, which is a phenomenal movie, which I absolutely love. Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves, you know, they're out there on the surfing, just surfing, and the joy and the bliss, but just the power of the wave, and respecting the power of the waves, but also being one with just your surrounding, because you can only control what you can control, and everything else around you can be chaotic. But it's just, there's something about that blissful peacefulness inside those waves, which I think is fantastic. I want to ask you this another question here real quick. I mean, in the book, you really get into it, and you express here the love that you have for your family. It runs deep. I mean, it runs really, really deep, you know. So talk to us about your relationship with your mom and dad, when they, prior to all craziness going out. Like, what it was that relationship like, and how deep was that connection between you and your mom, and then you and your dad?
Yeah, so as a kid, I probably was closer with my Uncle Mike than my parents. I felt more love and connection with him. You know, my mom, I loved her, of course, she's my mother.
Hmm.
We didn't have the strongest bond. Like, if you asked me as a kid who I would gravitate towards first, Mike, my Uncle Mike, or my mom, it was probably my Uncle Mike. My dad was always, he was always there, and we had a good connection and relationship, but it wasn't until I was older that he and I grew really close. When he came back from prison and I was older, more mature, we became codependent, really.
Hmm.
But growing up as a kid, it was my Uncle Mike. I have memories of waking up and maybe being scared, or something happened. I had a dream, a nightmare, and the TV's on in the room, and my mom's passed out on the bed, and she wouldn't wake up, and I'm trying to wake her up. I'm scared. So I would go into my Uncle Mike's room and climb into his bed and sleep with him. And that's something that occurred often. You know, I didn't realize how much that happened until later on in life. I think my dad or my mom told me, yeah, you'd always go and sleep with Uncle Mike. So I think he always just represented security and safety for me as a kid. That's why I opened up by saying he was my guardian angel growing up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember reading that in the book, which is a very powerful, just a child yearning for that parental love, right? That wanting to feel that embrace. And, you know, thank goodness for Uncle Mike and doing what he did and stepping up, as you will find out later on, you know, in the book, and through obviously our conversation, how great that man was for doing what he did. Um, you know, as I was reading the book, as I was going through and listening to, um, what you were saying and how you were saying it, the thought came to me of, in a movie, right? There's all these different characters, right? The character developments, and you reminded me so much of a dynamic character, and it's because what you're doing now, you had to go through something that would get you into space to really find your zone of genius. The book, The Big Leap, talks a lot about finding your zone of genius. So I need to read this because I think we're going to see your character. We're going to see this dynamic character come to life. So by definition, it says a dynamic character is one who evolves or changes significantly over time. This label is often reserved for the main character, given the conflict they're trying to overcome. If they come out on the other side, they typically grown and evolved in some way. So get us into this space now, because now you have this massive conflict, right? You've gone through your parents are in and out, of your life. You now go into this dark place in junior high and high school where, like you said, you suppressed everything. You suppressed friends, you suppressed family. You talk about kind of that, you didn't really go home much, didn't want to see your own siblings or your Uncle Mike. And then you stopped doing what actually brought you joy and love. Help us, if you will, for a second. Help us understand kind of that process was, and you were numbing everything. And I think people need to understand that you were doing drugs not because you were a bad kid, not because that you were just some, you know, hoodlum or some chaotic creature. In the book, you talked about you just wanted to numb what it is you were going through. Take us into that. Help us understand a little bit more of that process of, I'm not doing this to hurt myself. I'm doing this to help escape what was going on through my brain.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably was happening unconsciously too. You know, being at that age, at least I was easily impressionable. Once my parents left the picture, I really had a I don't care attitude. Like I was so
Mhm.
heartbroken that what else could happen to me? You know, the next step was death, and I didn't even think about that. I never realized that I could overdose or die from doing drugs or being reckless in my behavior. But I was so heartbroken because of what happened that I just really lost all care for myself and life. So I would drink as much as I wanted to. I would smoke. I would take pills. You know, there's so many times where I could have easily died in my sleep. I had people in my circle or, associates, friends growing up who died, who overdosed. A lot of people did because we didn't know what we were doing. We were so young, 14, 15. I knew that when I was drinking or smoking, it helped me not to think about being at home, but
Mhm.
it wasn't a thought every time I went and got high. I mean, what happened was early on, I started experimenting and using those things and it helped. I knew it was a crutch. And then over time, my identity started to become warped. I started to associate myself and who I was with drug and alcohol use to the point where I remember even having conversations with people saying, gosh, what do sober people do? Their life must be so boring. I can never imagine being like that. You know, by the time
Right.
I was 16, 17, 18, because my identity had become so warped. And now I associated me, Sean, as somebody who habitually uses drugs and alcohol. Like, and not just the drinking and the drug use, but my attitude and demeanor changed too. As a kid growing up, I was very much full of love and I was easy to make friends with. I was outgoing. But during this time, I became not like a recluse. I was still outgoing, but more reserved,
Mhm.
more withheld. It was a darker side of me. And I got in fights. I got in fights and I thought that if I acted tough, it was like putting on a mask and people wouldn't even be able to see the pain that I was going through. So I used drugs and alcohol to numb the pain. And then I put this false bravado up, this
Yeah.
front to try to not let people see what I was going through. So through high school, I got in fights. I thought that I would be cool if I was a tough guy or if I could get in a fight and win, that made me somebody of status. And all I was doing is continuing to cement this warped mentality, like, like deeper and deeper into me, right? Like ingrain it
Mhm.
deeper and deeper into me. So yeah, by the time I was 18, 19, 20, I was a much different person than I was when I was 13, like a completely different person. The
Yeah.
whole time I knew deep down inside that that wasn't who I wanted to be, that that wasn't my real self. But I felt by the time I was 18 and 19 that I couldn't just change now. I couldn't, what was I going to do to change? Like, I couldn't just go back to how I wanted to be. I felt like I was destined to be that person for the rest of my life.
Oh, say that again. That last quote that you just said about destiny. Say that again, please.
Yeah, I felt by the time I was 18 or 19, I couldn't just go back and change who I was now. I felt that I was destined to be that version of myself for the rest of my life.
Oh my guys, look, if you don't hit pause and just reflect on what he said, that is such a powerful statement, right? He's at down. Actually, let me I want to read this to you because I think it's very fitting. On page 21, I love this where you said page 21, the first paragraph, it says, I don't know what was worse, missing my parents or being reminded of what they had become. I miss the parents I once had in my life. My dad was gone and my mom was a shadow of the person I once knew. It broke my heart to see her that way. She was more like a stranger than the mother I had grown up with. It wasn't that, it wasn't, your reality became so much bleaker because you were just yearning for something. You were yearning for, like you said, what are normal parents like? You once had a blissful life going through sports and having free care and the love of a family, which now has been completely shattered and altered. And now you're trying to find something. You're like, I guess this is just who I'm meant to be. I guess this is my lot in life, as they say. But we know that's not right because of what you're doing. So I want, if you could, Sean, say you're in front of a group of kids right now, and they're listening to what you're saying. You've got a stadium full of 100,000 kids, all have kind of the same walk of life, been through and are going through, about to go through, or have been through some of the same circumstances that you've been through. And all they want is some spark of life, something that, some light to them, something that will help change the perception of what they think they are to what they should become. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I love that question. I would tell them, I would ask them to think back to a time when they felt their happiest. What were they doing? What are those memories filled with? Was it sports? Was it a time in school? Is it a place you went, a vacation? Who were you with? Was it your parents, your siblings, friends? Think of the time when you were filled with the most joy and happiness, and you felt so sure of who you were and what you wanted to do in life. And I want every individual to know, not just children, but grown individuals as well, is that person's still very much alive inside of you. And just because you go through dark times and you're faced with hardships, you lose people along the way, and you go through things that make you question who you are, doesn't mean that that person is lost. That person's still very much inside of you. And don't ever give up hope that you can connect back to that individual and live that life that you want. There's going to come a time or an opportunity where that's possible, but you have to believe that it's possible first and foremost. So that's the message. You're going to go through hardships. Life's tough, man. Life is filled with adversity and trials and tribulations, but as long as you never lose hope and faith in who you are down at the core, and you can remember those moments, you still have a fighting chance.
Stop it, man. Look, guys, I say this all the time, but I'm telling you right now, if you don't push pause, rip your shirt off, run outside and scream as loud as you can, you got to check your pulse. Seriously, here is somebody that has grown up. That would say somebody has it worse off than you do. Look, I mean, come on. He's literally telling you that just have hope. Don't accept the false reality, the false narrative that you are painting for yourself or others that are trying to put on you. Look, just stay with it every single day. Dang, Sean, we could stop. We could literally stop. That could be a whole master course on just overcoming these false narratives. Good. And I hope you write another book. I really do. I really hope you. I know there's something in there. I cannot wait for the second book. I'm putting it out there right now. Sean's going to write a second book, everybody. It's going to be fan-freaking-tastic, man. That was power beyond itself. All right. 7 years prison. You didn't do it. Why am I here? Take us through that. Take us. How did you get there? We know that the fight broke out. You were covered in blood. They came and arrested you, but how did we get there? I mean, how did we end up where we ended up?
Yeah. How does that happen? Right.
Yeah.
So initially, when I got arrested, I thought that they were just trying to press me for information and scare me. That's what I really thought. I thought they wanted me to tell them who did the stabbing, because that's what happened. So 2 individuals were stabbed during that fight by 2 separate people. And I was the one seen on top of the guy who got stabbed severely. So no one saw the initial attack. All the people at the party came out when they heard the noise in the fight. And that's when they saw me wrestling around this guy. And when I stood up and I threw those 2 punches, that's what everyone told the cops. They said, hey, we saw Sean on top of him throwing punches. Then he ran and fled. And this individual stayed face down, bleeding. And he had been, actually, his throat had been slit. That's what happened. It wasn't just like a minor stabbing. This individual's throat was slit and he was on life support. They said on the way to the hospital, he actually died 3 times and they had to use the defibrillators to bring him back to life. It's a miracle that he lived. So this wasn't just a minor incident. They were looking at, attempted murder, decades in prison. That's what I was looking at and facing. And I'll never forget the first day in court. When I went in, my lawyer came up to me as members of the news press are taking my picture, and everyone in the whole courtroom's just staring at me. I'm shackled up, wearing the prison color, the jail blues, and I have handcuffs on my ankles and wrists. And she said, hey, the judge and the district attorney want to amend your charges to homicide. The victim's in a coma. No one thinks he's going to survive. So they're looking at changing your charges to homicide today. And that was the first thing my lawyer said to me in court. And that was only days after I was arrested. So this is all hitting me, man, just like a tidal wave. And honestly, it was so surreal and it was so intense, but I couldn't believe it was even real. I was almost experiencing a disconnect from the situation. Now, I don't know if that's because I was also coming off of a lot of drugs and alcohol that I'd been abusing for so long, but I couldn't fully grasp what was happening to me. I was still in denial. I thought that there's no way this could happen. There's no way. They're going to figure out the truth. This is what detectives do and what the justice system is built for, to find out the truth. There's no way that I could actually be accused and found guilty for this crime because I did not do it. You know,
Right.
so at first I was hopeful, but it was also being in denial and naive. So then when I got the police report, I realized how bad it looked. They had a bloody shirt. They saw me fighting with the guy who was assaulted. There was, man, two handfuls of eyewitness testimony. You know, like I said, they had the DNA on the shirt of the blood. And then my friend who I went to the party with and left with, he cooperated with them in a way that painted a really bad picture of me. He knew I didn't do it, but he was so scared because they charged him with accessory to attempted murder that all he wanted to do was distance himself from me. That was probably his lawyer's doing. That was probably his, you know, recommendation, but
Right.
he didn't come forward and say, hey, I was right there. I know Sean didn't stab the guy. I left with Sean. He didn't have a weapon. I was 5 feet away from the incident. Like, he could have cleared my name and he didn't. And so that was devastating. And now within the first couple months, everything's starting to hit me. You know, I'm in jail. I could spend the rest of my life in prison, you know, reflecting on the past and realizing I had just wasted my life and I didn't live as the person I wanted to be. All of these things started to stand out to me. And, you know, in that cell, for the first time in my life, at least in a decade, I started to be honest with myself.
Mm-hmm.
From 13 to 23, I was in a constant state of denial. I was lying to myself about my life. I was unwilling to accept what I had gone through. And because of that, it was keeping me stuck in this state of, you know, despair, of self-loathing. And in that cell, I started to think about all these things and I started to feel the emotional impact behind those events. You know, mind you, I'm sober now a couple months and I'm starting to feel these emotions I hadn't felt my entire life. And they're swelling inside of me and I'm having all of these realizations. And, you know, the court proceedings and the sentencing and all that, that's almost an afterthought at this point. I'm going through this internal transformation. You know, I'm going through this major shift in recollection of what I went through and how it affected me. And I started to heal in that cell. I started making amends with my past. I started to forgive my parents. And when I did that, man, I felt this huge weight lifted off my shoulders, this huge weight. And I started to feel happy for the first time in years, like genuinely just happy with myself and who I was. But the next thing I experienced was immense regret for the choices I made. And I saw that, man, if I had accepted my past and done this inner work a long time ago, I could have moved on in my life, but I stayed stuck for 10 years because I was unwilling to accept it. Mm-hmm. And that's when the regret set in, because I didn't go to college. I didn't pursue my dreams of being a professional athlete. Everyone who knew me only knew a shadow of the man I could have been. I knew deep down inside of me that I was made for great things. It was something I always felt as a child, that I was capable to do whatever I set my mind to and have a serious impact and just live an amazing life. It was just something ingrained into me. And I felt so ashamed for not being that person. So in that cell, something started to aliven inside of me, some energy, some willingness to fight, you know, my truth. That person I told you that was suppressed all those years, he started to come back alive. And when I felt that, man, I made a commitment to myself that I would never again contribute to the regrets that I was feeling, that I would give my all to every moment of my life to be someone that I was proud of, to push myself to be great, to pursue my dreams. I was never again just going to coast through life and take it for granted. And I made this promise to myself, not knowing if I was going to go to prison for 50 years or if I was going to do 10 or what was going to happen. But I had to make a commitment to myself, to my identity and who I was going to be no matter what. Mm-hmm. No matter what. So it was that promise. And then the second one, that I would never use drugs or alcohol ever again. I knew that it had been a crutch. I knew that's not who I was. I knew that it was just going to hold me back and cause more problems in my life if I continued to use drugs and alcohol. And when I made that commitment, that was over 9 years ago. I've been clean and sober ever since. I never got high or drank alcohol ever again from that moment forward. So those two promises I made to myself, and almost like the melting away of my temporary identity, allowed me to get back to the core of that young boy who had been heartbroken, who, you know, had gone through those tough times. And I almost was making a promise to make it right for him. That's almost what it felt like. It felt like I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to seek redemption so that I could make his pain and his hurt okay. so that I could redeem or seek redemption for him, because it wasn't fair what he went through. And that's really this internal transformation I was going through in the first 6 months while I was in jail.
Oh, guys. Oh, my life. Oh, you said, I mean, you said like a lot of things there that are just super amazing and impactful. I want our listeners and those that are watching this on YouTube and some other streaming services to understand that you have to understand that the cell that Sean was in wasn't like this big cushy cell, wasn't like a 10 by 10 cell. In fact, in the book, he specifically says how big that cell was, right? He says that I could touch both walls simultaneously. Other than my cellmate, I was in complete isolation from the outside world. It wasn't like you had to share this little tiny box with somebody else and also overcome the pain that you were going through and also come down from all the drugs that you were on, the alcohol, come through all of that. Essentially, if people want to know, Sean just painted you the picture of his rock bottom. He had hit what they like to consider rock bottom. The other thing you said was impactful is I always hear this conversation with mentors that I have. He say, if your 5-year-old self were looking at you now, what would that 5-year-old self say? And you basically said what you are doing now is to redeem that child that you had lost and to make that child yourself, make yourself proud of who the man you have become and who you continue to become. Dude, come on. Like, seriously, it's unbelievable. It's seriously unbelievable. I need to read this quote real quick because I think it sums up a lot. Page 61 or 62 kind of gives you that torment, right? Since the drugs are out of my system, I could feel everything so intimately. It was a painful and disheartening. However, it was completely necessary. In those moments, I felt as close to death as I ever had, as hopeless as I could ever imagine being. Only this was worse than death because I was still here reliving all the wasted negative aspects of my life I would never get back. I had to live in the pain. I had to embrace it. That was my truth and my reality that I couldn't ignore. Imprisoned with no salvation in sight, it felt like my entire life was over before it had begun. Okay, Sean, let me ask this question because that statement is that sucks for a lot of people, even for yourself to realize and to come to that grasp reality. How then are you able to transform that into what you just said? I'm going to become the best version of myself, whether it's in here or out. If I ever will get out, I promise to be the best version of myself. How can you come to that answer when this and your reality now could be stuck in a 6x6, 8x8 cement jungle for the next 7 or however long you'd be in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've heard people say this, that you're your real self when you're at your worst. Like, don't come and ask me how life is if I have $1 million in the bank and I'm retired and life is good, right? Like, come see me when I'm at my lowest. I'm in that cell. I'm suffering. I'm coming off of drugs and alcohol. That's when you find out who you really are and what you're made of. What I found is that I'm resilient, that, I have something within me that's going to keep fighting and not give up, that I have something in me that believes in myself. See, for all those years, I stopped believing in myself. I stopped believing in myself. Therefore, my actions showed it. I didn't love myself. I didn't believe myself. So I abused myself through drugs, through alcohol, through my behavior. I felt so ashamed of that when I was reflecting on my life. The regret that I had for the way I chose to live was more tormenting than the thought of spending the rest of my life in prison. And I had to fight for that person that I had neglected all those years. That was what I was fighting for. Something inside of me just couldn't accept it. I couldn't allow that to be the end. That wasn't the last chapter for me. And I just wouldn't accept it. It was a refusal to accept me going out like that. That's what it was. And I was just going to fight to the death. And I was just going to fight every day to make progress and to move forward and somehow, some way make this thing work. And that was my thought process. Obviously, going through that healing process and reflecting like I did help, because I went from feeling as low as you heard me describe in that passage to feeling like I never gave up hope. I always felt a semblance of hope. And I always clung on to faith that somehow, some way things could possibly get better. And that's really what got me through that dark time. If I didn't have hope or a little bit of faith that somehow, some way things could get better, maybe I wouldn't have tried. Maybe I would have given up. Maybe I would have sought out drugs, alcohol, and prison to just stay numb. But for whatever reason, I just wouldn't allow myself to quit or give up. And it was because I could associate quitting and giving up or drugs or that old behavior with the pain I was experiencing. So I never could do that to myself again. So I had to do things differently. I had to do the opposite. I had to become the person I wanted to be, not the person I settled for. And that was just the beginning of my shift in thinking, and over time, the actions that I took to take back control of my life.